Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18+ Ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper and more intense versions are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. They say that when you freeze to death, there is a moment right at the very end where the cold stops hurting. Your blood slows down, your mind drifts, and a strange, phantom warmth wraps around you just before the dark takes over. I wouldn't know. In my previous life, I died in a sterile hospital room surrounded by the beeping of machines and the smell of antiseptic, a modern architect whose heart simply decided it was too tired to keep beating. But the boy whose body I woke up in, he knew exactly what the snow felt like. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I registered was pain, a sharp, biting, relentless agony in my knees. I was kneeling on frozen white flagstones. The wind was howling, whipping thin layers of snow against my face like tiny knives. I looked down and saw hands that were not mine, slender, trembling, blue at the fingertips, gripping the edges of a ruined silk robe. And then, the memories hit me. Not mine, his. They crashed into my brain like a falling building. His name was Prince Liyan. He was a royal hostage, the last surviving son of a conquered kingdom, kept in the imperial palace of Yan as a political trophy. But the tragedy of Prince Liyan was not that he was a prisoner. The tragedy was that he had fallen desperately, hopelessly, pathetically in love with his captor, Emperor Yanxing. The memories showed me a man with eyes like winter wolves and a heart made of iron. I saw 2 years of Liyan humiliating himself. I saw Liyan waiting outside the emperor's chambers in the pouring rain just to hand him a cloak. I saw Liyan enduring the mockery of the court concubines, drinking poisoned wine meant for the emperor, and surviving only to be told he was being dramatic. And finally, I saw what led to this moment. Liyan had found out the emperor was planning to marry the daughter of a powerful general. Liyan had fallen to his knees in the grand throne room, begging the emperor not to do it, sobbing until his voice broke. The emperor, disgusted by the display, had ordered him to kneel in the courtyard of the Plum Blossom Pavilion until the snow buried his childish delusion. So Liyan knelt. For 10 hours, he knelt until the cold seeped into his bones, until his heart shattered, until his spirit quietly snapped and slipped away into the freezing night. And then, I woke up in his place. I took a slow, rattling breath. The air tasted like frost and old copper. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I just looked at the snow, piling up around my knees. Somewhere in my chest, I could feel the residual ache of the original Liyan's broken heart. It throbbed with a pathetic, desperate rhythm. But I am a practical man. I spent my past life designing foundations, making sure structures could bear heavy loads without collapsing. I do not have the time, nor the inclination, to bear the weight of a foolish boy's unrequited love. I placed my hands flat against the freezing stone, and, slowly, I stood up. My joints popped and screamed in protest. My legs shook so violently I almost collapsed again, but I locked my knees. I pulled the thin, ruined robes tighter around my shoulders. "Your Highness!" A panicked voice hissed from the shadows. A palace guard stepped forward, his spear trembling in his grip. His eyes were wide with shock. "Your Highness, you cannot stand. His Imperial Majesty ordered you to kneel until dawn. If you rise, he will—" "He will what?" I interrupted. My voice was hoarse, rough from the cold, but it was steady. It did not sound like the weeping boy they were used to. "Kill me? Let him. I am going inside. If the Emperor wishes to complain, he can come and tell me himself." I didn't wait for his answer. I turned my back on the grand, glittering peaks of the inner palace, and I walked away. I didn't walk to Liyan's opulent, gilded chambers near the Emperor's wing. I knew those rooms were filled with things that would only remind this body of its trauma. Instead, I walked to the furthest, most neglected corner of the palace grounds. The cold palace, the abandoned western courtyard, where discarded concubines were sent to be forgotten. It was dark. The paper screens on the doors were torn, flapping in the wind. The garden was overgrown with dead weeds. It was perfect. It was quiet. I pushed the door open, found a dusty wooden bed, curled up under my freezing robes, and went to sleep. When you stop caring about what powerful people think of you, it is amazing how much free time you suddenly have. The first week in the cold palace, nobody came looking for me. I assumed the emperor thought I was throwing a tantrum, that I would come crawling back to his boots, weeping apologies, begging for a scrap of his attention. He was waiting for the performance to end. He didn't realize the actor had left the stage permanently. I spent those first few weeks fixing my new home. I am an architect. I like making things whole. I found an old hammer and some rusted nails in a forgotten shed. I repaired the broken hinges on the doors. I patched the paper screens with rice paste and old scrolls I found in the study. I chopped my own firewood from the dead trees in the courtyard. My hands, which used to be unblemished and soft, blistered and calloused. I liked the calluses. They felt like armor. They felt like mine. There was a single servant who stayed with me, a young eunuch named Bao. At first he cried every day, terrified that we would starve or be executed. But when he saw me, a former royal prince, rolling up my sleeves to scrub the floorboards and boil plain rice over a fire I built myself, his fear turned into a confused, silent awe. "My prince," Bao whispered one evening as I was sanding down a splintered table by the light of a single candle. The emperor's head eunuch came to the outer gate today." I didn't look up. I blew the sawdust off the wood. "Did he?" "Yes, he brought a message. His Majesty commands you to attend the evening banquet. He says your punishment is over. You may return to your old chambers." I ran my thumb over the smooth wood. It was good, solid. "Tell him I am busy," I said calmly. "And tell him I have misplaced my formal robes, so I cannot attend. If he asks again, tell him I died of a cold." Bao stared at me as if I had sprouted a second head. You are refusing the emperor?" "I am refusing a bad evening," I corrected him. "Go warm up the soup, Bao. We have a lot of weeding to do tomorrow." What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the emperor's head eunuch had not left. He had been standing just outside the paper screen, listening. 2 days later, the rain came. It was a heavy, relentless spring downpour that turned the palace roofs into rushing rivers. I was sitting on the wooden veranda of the cold palace, wearing a plain gray hemp robe. My hair, usually pinned up in elaborate jade crowns by the old Liyan, was tied back with a simple strip of black cloth. I was reading an old text on irrigation when the courtyard gates swung open. Heavy, purposeful footsteps splashed through the puddles. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air in the courtyard changed. It grew heavy, charged, suffocating. It smelled of ozone, rain, and expensive dark sandalwood. Emperor Yanxing. He stood at the edge of the veranda. He was flanked by guards, holding an oiled paper umbrella, dressed in robes of black and gold silk that swallowed the light. He looked exactly like the memories showed him, dangerously handsome, his jaw sharp, his eyes like crushed obsidian. He was a man used to the world holding its breath when he walked into a room. I did not hold my breath. I carefully marked my page with a dried leaf, closed the book, and finally looked at him. For a long moment, the emperor just stared. His eyes swept over my plain gray robes, my bare feet resting on the wooden boards, the complete absence of jewelry or makeup. He looked at the repaired doors, the chopped firewood, the neatness of a life that did not include him. He looked confused. And beneath that confusion, there was a flicker of something dark and irritated. "Liyan," he said. His voice was a deep, resonating rumble. It was the voice that used to make the original owner of this body tremble with joy. I felt a small flutter in my chest, muscle memory. I took a slow breath, crushed that flutter into dust, and stood up. I gave him a perfect, shallow, utterly lifeless court bow. "Your Imperial Majesty," I said, my tone polite, flat, and completely empty. "To what do I owe the honor of this visit to the Western ruins?" He stepped onto the veranda. He closed his umbrella and handed it to a guard without looking away from me. He stepped closer, too close. The height difference between us was significant. He loomed over me, trying to use his physical presence to force a reaction out of me. "You did not come to the banquet," Yanxing said, his voice dropping low, a dangerous warning. "You refused my summons." "I sent word that I was unwell," I replied easily, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You look perfectly well." His eyes narrowed, searching my face for the familiar tears. the desperate pleading. What is this game, Liyan? Is this a new tactic? You sulk in the cold palace, dress like a peasant, and pretend to ignore me to gain my pity? I couldn't help it. I let out a short, quiet laugh. It wasn't a bitter laugh. It was genuinely amused. The sound seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He froze. A game, I repeated softly. I looked past him, at the rain falling on the mud. Your Majesty, everything to you is a game of power. But I am no longer playing. I am not trying to gain your pity. I am simply existing, and I would prefer to do it quietly. He stepped even closer. The distance between us evaporated. I could feel the heat radiating from his chest, smell the dark, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and rain. His large, gloved hand shot out, his fingers gripping my chin, forcing me to look up at him. You do not get to decide when you stop playing, he whispered, his breath brushing my lips. It was a threat, but his eyes were doing something strange. They were dropping down to my mouth, then back up to my eyes, tracing the calm, unbothered expression on my face, as if I were a puzzle he couldn't solve. In the past, Liyan would have melted into this touch. He would have placed his hands on the Emperor's chest and begged for a kiss. I just let my hands hang loosely at my sides. I didn't pull away. I didn't struggle. I just looked at him with the same mild interest I would give a strange bug on a leaf. Are you finished, Your Majesty? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper, completely devoid of emotion. You are squeezing my jaw, and I have water boiling inside. I wouldn't want the pot to overflow. The Emperor stared at me. I watched the muscle in his jaw clench. The air between us was so tight, it felt like a drawn bowstring. Slowly, almost reluctantly, his fingers loosened. He let go of my chin, his hand lingering in the air for a fraction of a second before dropping to his side. He took a step back. You will return to the Eastern Wing tomorrow, he ordered, though it sounded less like a command and more like he was testing the waters. I respectfully decline, I said, bowing again. The roof there leaks when it rains. I fixed the roof here. Have a safe walk back to the palace, Your Majesty. Watch your step in the mud. I turned my back on the most powerful man in the world, walked inside, and slid the paper door shut. And if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation is available on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment. After the day of the rain, everything changed. The Emperor did not force me back to the Eastern Wing. Instead, he started sending things to the cold palace. First, it was high-grade charcoal. Then, it was silk robes in deep blues and silvers. Then, it was rare teas and delicacies from the royal kitchen. I kept the charcoal to keep Bao warm. I used the silk robes as extra blankets for the harsh nights. The tea I drank, because good tea is good tea, no matter who sends it. But I never sent a note of thanks. I never visited him. The less I cared, the more obsessed he became. He began finding excuses to be near my courtyard. I would be kneeling in the garden, tying up the tomato vines I had planted, and I would feel the heavy weight of a gaze on the back of my neck. I would turn and see him standing by the ruined moon gate, watching me, just watching. He watched the way I moved. He watched the way I tied my hair. He watched the dirt on my hands and the sweat on my collarbone. He looked at me like a starving man who had just realized that the food he threw away yesterday was the only thing that could save his life. One evening in late summer, the tension finally snapped. The palace was celebrating the Mid-Autumn Festival. The sky was lit with thousands of floating lanterns, painting the dark clouds with gold and crimson. I had retreated to the Imperial Library. I knew everyone would be at the banquet, so the library would be empty, quiet, and peaceful. I was standing on a small wooden stool, reaching for an architectural scroll on the highest shelf. It was just out of my grasp. I stretched, my hemp robe pulling tight across my shoulders. Suddenly, a large, warm chest pressed flush against my back. A heavy arm reached up over my shoulder. A large hand with long, calloused fingers effortlessly plucked the scroll from the shelf. My breath hitched. The air vanished from the room. I was trapped between the towering bookshelves and the solid, immovable wall of Emperor Yanxing. You shouldn't be climbing on unstable furniture, Liyan. His voice rumbled right next to my ear. The deep vibration of it sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. I didn't turn around. If I did, my face would brush against his throat. He was entirely too close. The scent of sandalwood, wine, and intense, suffocating heat wrapped around me. "Thank you, Your Majesty," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. I reached up to take the scroll from his hand. But he didn't let go. Instead, as my fingers gripped the parchment, his hand slid down. His thumb brushed against my wrist, pressing exactly over my pulse point. I knew my heart was beating a little faster, purely a physical reaction to danger, I told myself, and I knew he could feel it. "You are hiding in the library during a festival," Yanxing murmured. He didn't step back. In fact, he leaned in a fraction closer, his chest grazing my shoulder blades. "Are you avoiding me, Liyan?" "I am avoiding the noise, Your Majesty," I replied, staring straight ahead at the dusty wood of the shelf. "I find peace in quiet things now." "You never used to be quiet?" His voice dropped, sounding almost raw. He slowly lowered his head until his lips were mere inches from the sensitive skin of my neck. I could feel the heat of his breath. It was deliberate. "It was a hunt. You used to talk to me for hours. You used to follow me. You used to look at me like I was the sun." I closed my eyes for a brief second. "People change, Your Majesty. The sun burns if you stare at it too long. I simply learned to look at the shade." I tried to pull my wrist away, but his grip tightened. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to tell me I wasn't going anywhere. Suddenly, he turned me around. The small stool wobbled. I lost my balance, falling backward, but Yanxing caught me instantly. His arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me hard against his chest. My hands flew up, pressing flat against the heavy silk of his robes, right over his heart. It was beating wildly, fast, desperate. I looked up, startled, and met his eyes. They were completely dark, swirling with a storm of suppressed desire, confusion, and a terrible, aching hunger. "What happened to you?" he whispered fiercely, his gaze dropping to my lips. His free hand came up, his knuckles brushing down the side of my cheek. The touch was burning hot. "Who is this man wearing Li Xian's face? Where did my prince go?" My breath caught in my throat. For a second, just a split second, the sheer magnetic pull of this man, the overwhelming power of his undivided attention, threatened to pull me under. But then I remembered the snow. I remembered the boy who died crying. I pushed against his chest. I stepped back, forcing a polite distance between us. "He died, Your Majesty," I said softly, looking him dead in the eye. "He knelt in the snow for 10 hours, and he froze to death. I am just what was left behind." "A ghost." Yanxing flinched. The color drained from his face, as if I had driven a blade into his ribs. He looked down at his empty hands, the hands that had ordered Liyan into the cold. Before he could speak, a sharp, piercing whistle tore through the quiet of the library courtyard. It was followed by the sound of shattering glass and a wet, sickening thud. Yanxing's instincts were faster than lightning. His head snapped toward the window. "Assassins!" he roared. Before I could react, he lunged at me. He didn't draw his sword. He threw his entire body over mine, tackling me to the wooden floor just as a volley of black-fletched arrows smashed through the paper screens, burying themselves into the bookshelves exactly where I had been standing a second ago. We hit the ground hard. Yanxing shielded my body completely with his own, his heavy robes burying me in the dark. "Stay down," he snarled, rolling off me and drawing the heavy steel blade at his waist in one fluid motion. The library doors burst open. 6 men in dark clothes rushed in, blades glinting in the moonlight. They were not aiming for me. They were aiming for the Emperor. The festival had been a distraction. Yanxing was a warrior king. He moved like a demon, his sword deflecting strikes and cutting down the first 2 assassins in a spray of crimson. But there were too many, and they had trapped him in the narrow aisles between the bookshelves. A 3rd assassin swung a heavy curved blade toward Yanxing's blind spot. I didn't think. In my past life, I was a man of peace, but I knew physics, and I knew structure. I grabbed the heavy wooden stool I had been standing on, sprinted forward and smashed it across the assassin's knees. The man howled, his leg buckling. It gave Yanxing the split second he needed to spin around and finish him. But in that spin, another assassin lunged. A short dagger sliced through the air, catching Yanxing deep in his left shoulder. The Emperor grunted, staggering back. He killed the man, and the remaining 2 fled through the window, realizing their element of surprise was gone. Silence fell over the library, heavy with the smell of blood and torn paper. Yanxing dropped to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Dark blood was seeping rapidly through his gold-embroidered silk. He looked up at me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with shock. "You?" he panted, gritting his teeth against the pain. "You didn't run? You stayed." "You saved my life first, Your Majesty," I said, walking toward him. I tore a long strip of clean cloth from the hem of my hemp robe, and unlike the royal court, I do not like to leave debts unpaid. I knelt in front of him. The air between us was suddenly entirely different. The adrenaline, the danger, the blood, it stripped away the titles and the games. "Take off the outer robe," I ordered, my voice leaving no room for argument. For a moment he just stared at me. Then, slowly, with his good arm, he loosened his belt. The heavy black silk fell away, leaving him in a thin white inner robe that was rapidly turning red. I moved closer, my knees pressing against his. I reached out, my fingers brushing the skin of his collarbone as I pulled the ruined silk aside to expose the wound. His skin was burning hot. As my hands touched him, I felt him shudder. It wasn't from the pain. I looked up. Yanxing wasn't looking at his bleeding shoulder. He was looking at me. Our faces were inches apart. The library was dark, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the broken screens. His breathing was heavy, ragged, and his eyes were fixed on my mouth with a desperation that was terrifying. "Liyan," he whispered, his voice cracking. He lifted his uninjured hand, his blood-stained fingers hovering just a millimeter from my cheek. "Why are you doing this to me?" "I am stopping the bleeding, Yanxing," I said quietly, deliberately using his name. "You know what I mean," he breathed. His hand finally cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheekbone. "You pull away from me, and then you stand beside me in the dark. You tell me the boy who loved me is dead, but your hands are so gentle. Punish me, Liyan. Hate me, strike me, but do not look at me with nothing in your eyes. I cannot survive that." The raw agony in his voice made my hands pause. For the first time since I woke up in this world, the wall I had built around myself cracked. I felt the dangerous, intoxicating pull of the man who ruled the world begging on his knees. "Hold still," I whispered, tying the bandage tight. As I pulled the knot, he surged forward. He didn't kiss me, but he buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling deeply, his broad shoulders trembling against my chest. His arms wrapped around my waist, pulling me into his lap, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. He held me like I was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I didn't hug him back, but I didn't push him away either. I sat there on the bloody floor of the library, the Emperor of Yan clinging to me in the dark, and I realized with a sinking heart that the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The aftermath of the assassination attempt shifted the balance of the entire palace. The Emperor survived, his wound healing quickly thanks to the palace physicians, but the rumor mill was vicious. Everyone knew that the forgotten hostage prince had fought beside the Emperor. Everyone knew that when the royal guards finally burst into the library, they found the ruthless Emperor Yanxing holding Prince Liyan in his arms, refusing to let the medics touch him until Liyan was escorted safely away. Overnight, the cold palace stopped being cold. Servants arrived by the dozens, bringing braziers, furs, and delicacies. Guards were stationed outside my courtyard, not to keep me in, but to keep the world out. And the Emperor came every night. He didn't demand entry. He didn't order me around. He would simply arrive after his court duties, carrying a scroll or a chessboard, and sit on my veranda. We fell into a strange, quiet routine. We would play chess by lantern light. We wouldn't speak much, but the silence was heavy, thick with words we were both refusing to say. I could feel him courting me. It was slow, it was deliberate, it was terrifyingly gentle. If I reached for my tea, he would subtly move the cup closer to my hand, so I wouldn't have to stretch. If the wind blew cold, he would silently take off his heavy fur-lined cloak and drape it over my shoulders. His fingers would brush the nape of my neck as he adjusted the collar, a touch so light it felt like a brand. I fought the attraction. I built walls of logic. I reminded myself of the snow, of the cruelty, of the fact that this man was a monarch who could snap my neck if I displeased him. But it is incredibly difficult to hate a man who looks at you like you are his god. Winter returned to the capital. The first snow began to fall, dusting the palace roofs in white. I was standing by the window of my room, watching the flakes fall. I hated the snow. My body remembered the pain of it, and my knees ached in phantom agony. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. A heavy, warm presence stepped behind me. Yanxing. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, pulling my back flush against his broad chest. He buried his face in my hair, his large hands resting flat over my stomach, holding me securely. He was radiating heat, melting the chill from my bones. "I hate the snow," I murmured, not fighting his embrace. The exhaustion of fighting him was wearing me down. Yanxing stiffened against me. "I know," he whispered. His voice was filled with a thick, choking regret. "I know, Liyan. I would burn the sky to stop it from falling on you ever again. I am sorry. I am so sorry." He had never apologized before. Emperors do not apologize. They command reality to change. But here he was, a sovereign ruler, whispering apologies into the hair of a broken hostage prince. He turned me around gently. The room was lit only by the soft orange glow of the brazier. He looked down at me, his dark eyes vulnerable, completely stripped of his armor. "Come back to the main palace with me," Yanxing pleaded softly. His hands slid up my arms, cupping my face. "Not as a hostage, not in the eastern wing. Come to my chambers. Be by my side. Let me spend the rest of my life making you forget the cold." His thumb brushed my lower lip. The sensual tension in the room spiked, suffocating and heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to lean into his touch. I wanted to let him protect me. The warmth he offered was so intoxicating. But I looked at the snow falling outside, and my mind cleared. I gently reached up and pulled his hands away from my face. "No, Yanxing," I said softly. He froze. "Liyan." "You are trying to make amends to a boy who isn't here anymore," I said, stepping back, putting a cold pocket of air between us. "You love the mystery I became. You love the fact that I don't need you. You are a conqueror, Yanxing. You destroyed the old Liyan because he surrendered to you too easily. Now you want me because I am a fortress you cannot breach." "That is not true." Yanxing's voice rose, raw with panic. He took a step toward me, but I held up a hand, stopping him. "If I go with you," I continued, my voice steady but deeply sad, "if I surrender to you, the mystery will end. I will become yours, and eventually you will look at me and remember that you already own me, and the snow will fall again." "I would never." "I saved your life in the library," I interrupted quietly. "You owe me a life debt. The Emperor of Yan does not leave debts unpaid." Yanxing's breath hitched. He stared at me, realizing what I was about to say before the words even left my mouth. His eyes widened in absolute terror. "No, do not ask it. Liyan, please, ask me for anything else. Gold, land, the heads of my enemies. Do not ask me for this." I looked at him, feeling a strange, hollow ache in my chest. I think, in another life, without the blood and the snow between us, I could have loved him, truly loved him. But not in this life. "I want my freedom," I said perfectly clearly. "I want an imperial decree releasing me from my status as a hostage. I want to leave the palace. I want to go south, to the warm provinces, where it doesn't snow." Silence fell over the room. It was heavier than the snow outside. It was the sound of a kingdom breaking. Yanxing stood there, staring at me. He looked like a man who had just been handed his own death sentence. He opened his mouth to deny me, to command the guards to lock the doors, to be the tyrant he was born to be. But he looked at my eyes. He saw the quiet, absolute resolve there. If he kept me, he would only be keeping a cage. The bird was already gone. Slowly, agonizingly, Yanxing closed his eyes. A single, silent tear slipped down the cheek of the Iron Emperor. "If that is what you wish," he whispered, his voice shattering into pieces, "it will be done." I left on a Tuesday. I didn't pack much, just the hemp robes I had worn in the cold palace, the books I had read, and the wooden cup I had carved myself. I left the silk, the gold, and the jade behind. Bao, the servant boy, cried as he loaded my small cart. I smiled and patted his shoulder, leaving him a pouch of silver that would ensure he lived well. I walked toward the massive southern gates of the imperial city. The morning air was crisp and cold, but the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. For the first time since I woke up in this body, I felt light. As I approached the gates, I saw a lone figure standing by the stone pillars. It was Yanxing. He was not wearing his imperial crown. He wore a simple dark cloak. He stood alone, without his guards, without his eunuchs, just a man. I stopped a few feet away from him. He looked at me, his eyes taking in every detail of my face, memorizing it as if he were trying to carve it into his soul. He reached inside his cloak and pulled out a heavy scroll, sealed with the imperial dragon stamp. My freedom. He held it out to me. His hand was trembling slightly. I reached out and took it. As my fingers brushed against his, he caught my hand. He didn't pull me in. He just held my hand, his thumb running over the calluses I had built, his head bowing low over my knuckles. "The south is warm," Yanxing said, his voice barely a rasp. "The roads are safe. I have ordered my hidden guards to watch over your journey from a distance. They will not interfere, but they will ensure no harm comes to you." "Thank you," I said softly. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that burned right through me. "You asked for your freedom, Liyan, and I gave it to you because I owe you my life," Yanxing whispered. "But you must know one thing. The conqueror in me is not dead." I tilted my head, my heart giving a strange, slow thump. "Is that a threat, Yanxing?" A sad, fiercely determined smile touched his lips. "It is a promise. Go south. Build your quiet life. Find your peace. But know that when my kingdom is secure, when my duties to the throne are fulfilled, I will come finding you." He stepped closer, leaning down until his lips were a breath away from my ear. His scent, dark sandalwood and morning frost, completely enveloped me. "And when I find you," he murmured, his voice sending a shiver of pure electricity down my spine, "I will not be an emperor commanding a hostage. I will be a man earning the heart of the man he loves. Run far, my prince, because I will spend the rest of my life chasing you." He pulled back, let go of my hand, and stepped aside. I looked at him for a long, silent moment. My chest felt tight. A part of me, a very small, terrifying part of me, hoped he would keep that promise. I gave him one final small smile. Not a court bow, just a smile between two men. "We will see, Yanxing," I said. I turned my back on the imperial city, walked through the massive stone gates, and stepped out into the sun. If you want the next part, the uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ ancient royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment.